Rockies. We're so thrilled to be offering our first virtual opening, and we've been longing for this for a long time, so thank you for joining us on this very special occasion. And as always, we want to acknowledge that we're working and playing and interacting and educating on the traditional territories of the Stoney Nakoda peoples, the Bearspaw, the Wesley Chiniki, the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, and the Tsuut'ina, part of the Dene people, the Tunaka, and the Shuswap, the Mountain Cree, and Métis. These people have been involved in this area for thousands of years, and every year and particularly during a time of challenge and change in our mountain landscape, we're very grateful for the guidance of Indigenous knowledge keepers whose resilience and connection to the land has kept them strong. And more importantly, we also turn to artists for inspiration, for fresh ways of looking at the world around us, and we're very delighted to have a very special artist here tonight. So we're going to be opening several new exhibitions virtually, and tonight we'll have a conversation about that work. But before I begin, I'd like to tell you a couple of things that are coming up in the next little while. In June, June 13th, is the 150th anniversary of our remarkable founder, Catherine Robb White. So we want to celebrate that with a special birthday party, and we'll be letting you know about that. We're also planning a really great online auction around the theme of mountain legends. So it's your chance to pick up a piece of mountain history and with stories behind it that I know will inspire you. That's going on in June as well with the very generous assistance of Doug Levis and his online auction. So that's going to be in June, and we'll keep you posted. But now it's my real great pleasure to introduce my colleague Ann Ewan, who's going to introduce the evening and introduce the speakers. Thank you. Ann?
Hi everybody, welcome to our virtual opening. This is great that you're online with us. Just a couple of quick things. Please be patient with us. This is our first, so if there are any glitches, we'll try and fix them as quickly as we can. And if you could hold your questions till the end, that would be great. But as you can see, there is a chat box, so you can type a question in there if you have one as our guests are speaking, so that you don't forget it. And also, please mute your screen. I'm sure we would love to hear your dogs bark, but it might be a little interrupting to our speakers. It's great that you're tuning in, and it's just great for us to be able to introduce Christine Klassen, whose gallery is the one that sells and hosts this wonderful artist by the name of Julya Hajnoczky. And it's just such a treat for us to have them both here. And I'm going to let them go and talk, and you can just be enthralled by them and all this amazing work. Thank you. So I'll just do a voiceover. First in is Christine.
Hi everyone. Nice for you to be joining us tonight.
And this is Julia over here. And I also want to just note that we are keeping a distance of 6 feet and more from each other. We've asked that everybody take their mask off when they're talking. I just didn't, so that you can hear what we're saying. So, good to go?
Yeah, we're going to stay our 6 feet apart, and we'll get started, everyone. Let's just start with this beautiful feature piece. I have to confess that, this is the first time I've seen a lot of these works, and I think it is for you as well, right? Yeah. Because, of course, a lot of this work was created this summer in different residencies and travels that you had. But this one is very unique because of its size. This is the first one you're seeing, so it may look just normal, but it's actually exceptionally tall. So tell us about, I guess that the plant matter kind of dictated that, but...
Yeah, I'd been sticking to sort of the same proportions for a while, but as I was creating all this new stuff this summer, there was, it started to seem like it made more sense to follow what the plants were asking for. So.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I was going to say, I was looking at this one earlier too. What is this plant?
So this is, it's actually a really neat plant. It's called ghost pipe, and normally when it comes up, it's all white, so it gets its nutrients from other plants. So it doesn't photosynthesize. It has no green in it like other plants.
Okay.
And this is why it's called ghost pipe. They're completely white, and then as they break down, they turn darker and darker and just kind of disappear. But yeah, it's a really interesting little plant.
No, it's pretty stunning. I really like the graphic quality of this. So I guess we're going to tour around. I have some questions prepared with my little notes. Some things might just go in a whole other direction. Yeah. But we've got about like 30 minutes together, so let's just kind of jump into it here. Let's get a shot of this one, just because I feel that this one is, again, a little bit unique in that it's a bit of a fuller composition compared to some of the others in this show. Get a nice shot of it there, and then I think if we, of course I'm talking behind you both. So with that one in mind, because I think that one is a little unique as well, because of its composition being a lot fuller with plant materials. Because what I'm used to seeing is, of course, like these, which are, you know, a little bit more minimal with it. So tell me a bit about that. Like, how do you decide, I guess, like your composition? Like, if you want one to be, you know, very subtle versus one that is like full.
This has been something that, again, it really depends on the place where I'm gathering materials from. As this body of work has developed, it's become a lot more about really just kind of taking a portrait of a specific place.
Right.
As opposed to, you know, maybe when I started working with this process and just kind of putting together things that look nice together. So that's been part of it. So something like this might come from a place that is actually quite minimalist as a landscape itself.
Okay.
So it'll be sort of a reflection of that. And then something like the cones that we were just looking at would be from like a really dense forest that just has this sort of wealth of all these different trees making up this community. So
sure.
Making it sort of reflect that place a little bit more.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Okay.
Evoke that landscape.
That's something. Yeah, that's completely something new for me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess while we're on this one, like, I know with some of these newer ones too, we're seeing. Well, I guess in some of the older ones too, there are some kind of animals and shells, but this one in particular kind of features this. Where was this one from? Like, I know they're from different places in the residency, and maybe as we go along, you can kind of touch base on some of those places.
So the cones that we just saw, I created that piece during a residency called Empire of Dirt, which is like the most perfectly named residency for a person like me, of course. And so that was in BC, sort of close to Creston. And it's, as you can probably get the sense from the image, is a beautiful forested landscape. This is from southern Alberta, so much more of a prairie kind of landscape. And the snails were a total surprise to me. I was looking at these interesting, almost succulent kind of flowers and poking around in the moss, and there were all these snail shells there, and of course plenty of living snails, which I left to their business.
Yes.
But so many of these shells had been left behind too, and so it just seemed to make sense to sort of incorporate a whole bunch of them because there were so many of them crawling around. So it was really neat. So that's where this one comes from.
And maybe let's keep moving because there's too many images to and so little time to just be stuck in front of one. Let's even. Is there anyone?
Yeah. Well, these two even are close to home.
Okay. And I guess, you know, if you could speak a little bit, because I know you did a number of residencies, or was it a number of residencies? Like you were all over the place this summer.
It was so busy, I'm starting to lose track.
Right. So maybe give us a little bit bit, like, so that was Southern Alberta. You were at the residency in BC.
Yeah,
And I know some of them are from kind of more the West Coast.
Yeah, West Coast. I was all over Western Canada. At first, sticking mostly to Alberta, just based on sort of lockdown protocols, meant I had to change some of my plans because I had originally been planning to head out to BC, but it wound up working out really nicely because I really started exploring Alberta in a lot more depth than maybe I had originally planned to. So I was down near Waterton, down, this is more out towards the mountains in this part of the world, up north almost all the way near Hinton, so kind of all over the place. And then later, once restrictions had eased a bit, out to the west coast, so to Pacific Rim National Park, and in the other directions to Grasslands National Park, because I was working with Parks Canada. I was actually fortunate enough to get collections permits to work and actually gather some materials.
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about that, because I know that's something that is also quite important to your creative practice, that these plants and these bits are like kind of collected ethically.
As ethically as possible. It's still something I think about a lot and sort of struggle with, but working with parks recently has been a really interesting step, just because it has, first of all, it's allowed me to just connect with a lot of people who are working in parks, and so people who can tell me about the landscape and the natural history of it, which has been a huge benefit. But yeah, also just to be permitted within certain parameters to gather materials from that place, because the landscapes that you find in some of the parks are just, they don't exist anywhere else. That's why there are parks for them.
Right,
so
that's why they're protected,
Yeah, and so in some of them, and it did change a lot about the way that I work too, once we get to the stuff from Pacific Rim. I was only allowed to collect stuff that was, like, I couldn't pick anything, it had to be sort of sitting there, I could take it, scan it right away, and then put it back where I got it from. And it has really changed the way that I work, and I think it means I'm working with things a lot more immediately. So it's a lot more vital feeling, and as opposed to something that's been sitting in a box in my studio for 6 months or something. So so it's even the look of the work has changed as that's happened.
Well, and let's keep moving again, because there's so many.
We do have a question.
Okay. Sorry.
And we have a question that says, what do you do with all of the matter once you have used it in your art pieces?
It really depends. Some things are just once I have them, there's not necessarily any point to putting it back, so they stay with me in the collection. But like I said, a lot of the more recent work that I've been doing has sort of been collecting, scanning it on site, and then putting it back, and just
so it doesn't even travel home with you.
Yeah, it doesn't come home with me. It stays right where it was, which has been interesting and kind of freeing, because I'm running out of space.
Although if anyone's organized,
it's all very clearly labeled, but it's taking up a lot of room.
Okay. I particularly love this one, this plant. And one question that I've often thought about too with your work is, how do you decide what to use? Because you're touring around these beautiful parks. You're on these hikes, and we'll get into why you're a bad person to hike with. But you're seeing a lot of things. So how do you make those choices, I guess, as to this particular moss and this particular, it's or do you just scan everything you see? Or
when I first started working with this process, that's sort of what it felt like, because I wasn't really sure where it was going and what I wanted to say with the different pieces. But as it sort of came together, it became much more deliberate. Now I almost sort of compose as I'm collecting in a place. So whatever I'm gathering, I already sort of have an idea in my head of what it will look like, but often it's something that feels kind of magical to me. It's usually something very small, very tiny. I spend a lot of time hunched over Sunset Trail looking at tiny things. But
Well, and admittedly, sorry, but I find that interesting too. So for those of you who may not know that, because you're just getting an introduction to this work, some of these things are like
yeah,
itty bitty, right? Like
yeah,
this
like
big.
these are, I would say the plant itself might be about that big, and the seed head is about this big. So
Yeah. So you're really kind of
yeah,
giving them this whole other
totally
presence,
a
right?
presence. Yeah.
Because you're looking at,
Yeah, something really tiny. And I think that's what I am usually looking for, that I find most interesting, is these tiny little things that most people probably don't notice as they're rushing past me on the trail. Sometimes you see kids kind of stop and like poke at things, but most of the grown-ups that I see are looking for the end of the trail. But yeah, so that's what I'm looking for, and it's usually something that is probably quite common in a place. I'm not interested, I'm not taking anything that's rare or endangered.
Right.
Like, oh my god, it's
like
the
that
only
lady,
specimen of
that lady slipper that's like only blooms every 15 years. Like, okay,
yes,
that's also good to
jackpot.
know. Yeah, okay, good to know.
So they're usually actually quite common plants, but they're often something that's a really integral part of an ecosystem and very interesting, and they all have interesting stories behind them too, which is part of my practice too, is learning all about them and reading about them.
Okay, well let's keep going. What are we at here? Maybe we'll just keep sliding along.
Oh yeah, this is another different residency.
Yeah, this one is interesting. Again, it's a little, again, going back to what I was saying earlier with it being a bit of more of a fuller, presentation. It definitely got more, I guess, got the dried flower. I love that sense of like wind through this one.
Yes. So it won't surprise you to know that it was in southern Alberta.
Yeah, exactly.
And when I was there, it was indeed very windy. So
It's like a happy accident.
That's how these start to come together for me now, I think, is kind of trying to work while the sense of the landscape is still really fresh for me. And so, this was hot and dry and windy, and but also it's prairie can be really hard.
Yeah.
Like forest, it's easy. There's so much stuff, but prairie can be a little bit more of a challenge, I think, visually, because you look at it and you're like, wow, it's grass.
Right, it's a lot
But
of grass.
once you sort of stop and spend some time really staring at the ground for a while, there's all kinds of stuff, like these cool cacti and these fuzzy little plants. They're so fluffy, and just all sorts of beautiful and enchanting things.
Well, and I love that they do, they really do kind of tell a story about where they're from, right? That you get that sense of it being like the forest or the prairie. I love that about them, and I admit, I think that's something that I'm seeing more with this newer work than I was before, right?
Oh, for sure.
And maybe it was the same case, but you kind of maybe just zoned in on it a little bit more.
Yeah, it's definitely developed more as it's gone along. Yeah. So.
Okay, let's move along a little more. There's so many little jewelry bits.
More windy southern Alberta here.
I know, but there is, going back to what you said earlier about looking for things that kind of have like a magical, I see that in I see that in a lot of them, right? There is that element. There's that little kind of sense of the unknown where things are scattering, where, some of the ones we went through are like little bits of moss or kind of flying or petal. So, and this is just all like accidental?
Sometimes, yeah. Like with this one, for example, these seed pods, that's what these triangular seeds are from. And once they're dried, they just sort of like explode all over the place, which was a surprise to me. But yeah, so that as soon as I put them down on the glass,
They just scatter.
They just go all over the place. So.
Well, and that's just, it makes, I like that as opposed to it's like, no, I placed every single one, like seed pod by seed pod.
Once or twice.
Yeah.
There's a couple that are way out of line.
Yeah. Well, Well, it's okay too. You're allowed. You're allowed that.
A little fussy, micromanaging.
All right.
I have another question if you'd like to take one. Okay, this one is, do you have a background in biology or something science related?
Oh boy, I really wanted to be a scientist. I took Math 30 5 times to try and get a good enough math mark to be a scientist, and it just never panned out. But so I have more of an amateur's background in biology. So I do a lot of reading because I find it very interesting, but I don't have an academic science background, put it that way. So
Okay.
yeah.
I have another one. In your observations of these spaces, what is what you find the most fascinating?
Oh.
Should we go to the next one? while you answer this?
Yeah. Ponder that as we wander this way.
I mean, I'm definitely attracted to weird bones and stuff, like this little claw.
This was a really good one for that question.
You know, creepy things. I regularly have people send me text messages that are like, I found a dead thing, do you want it? You're like, yes, please.
Yeah. What is it? How big?
Yeah.
Well, and this is, I love that about, because it's not at first obvious, I guess, right?
Yeah, and honestly, this was like the basis for this whole thing. I found, we pulled over at the side of the road. I was on a road trip towards Waterton with my mom, and we pulled over to look at these hilarious ducks. If you want to look at a hilarious duck, look up a ruddy duck. Anyway, so that's what we were looking at, and then I looked down, and there's this lovely little assortment just in the ditch by the side of the road. So I collected that and all this, the little things that were growing around it. So again, just kind of a picture of a place. But when I'm collecting things, I guess just to come back to that question, it might be something that I've learned about ahead of time that I find really interesting, that there's a connection between certain things in a place, or it might just be something that I've noticed on my own. So sometimes it's learning from other people, and sometimes it's just from my own observations. But again, it's usually something really tiny, and something that's like, wow, this is moss that's, a quarter of an inch tall.
Yeah, that you'd miss if you were just
Not me.
walking normally.
Yeah, so.
No, but I love that, and we'll bring you in on the joke maybe finally. We've built up the suspense. But I've kind of joked with Julia, because she actually mentioned that she is the worst person to hike with, because a hike that should take like 15 minutes will take her like 4 hours, because she's just down, a couple steps down. So when we did a live stream for the gallery a little over a month ago, she sent me some pictures of her hiking, which is a lot of
It's not so much hiking; it's like a series of crouches.
Yeah, exactly. It's like squat, drop, look. But I do find that beautiful, that you are just like kind of taking the time again to look at all like the minutiae of nature and show us just all these things that we are kind of not noticing.
Walk by.
Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going. And for those of you who live in Banff, you might even have had the opportunity to see this one at the Banff Springs. It was recently purchased, and one of the edition of this was purchased and now hangs in the Rundle Room. But I do love this one. There's something about the depth of field in this one that is just, it makes people crazy at the gallery, I'm not gonna lie. They're like, how does she do that?
I know, and it's funny because I'm so not a technical person. Like, I don't like talking about lenses, and I don't even know what
stops.
Yeah, so because I just use, it's such a simple process, like I just use a really high resolution scanner to do all my images. So, truthfully, the scanner does does the technical work for me. I don't really have to
Fair enough, but there's still
worry
something
about it too much. But
about the way you're placing these compositions, and like this intensity. It's it's hard to see in a digital image, so you'll just have to come to the museum and see the show. Plug one to come see the show. We're not enough. Like, you have to come see this, because I'm sorry, I've been looking at her work for like years and I'm blown away.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it is almost working within a very particular set of constraints. Like, I have a certain amount of space, and if it doesn't fit there, then it's not getting its picture taken. And you know, if the shape of this branch is such that most of it is kind of way too far away from the glass, you can't see it, and it's not getting its picture taken either. So
there is, again, there's something, again, using the term magical, but there's something magical about getting it just so it's like the Goldilocks of...
Yeah, exactly. I spend an inordinate amount of time like propping up moss.
Right. I know, well, I think that's what makes a really good photograph, is that when you make something like look so effortless, it's really not, you know what I mean? Like, there's something to be said for that. And so you're kind of, you're definitely like a master of your craft here. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, 3 questions, holy smokes. I thought you said 3 minutes.
Should we go to the next
Let's keep going.
Okay, so my first question is, not sure if this has been covered or not already, can you talk about your experimentation with scale in your practice? How you magnify small elements and vice versa?
So, I have always been fascinated by tiny things, even as a kid. Everything, all my art projects and little plasticine things that I made were always tiny. So that's, I don't even remember why that.
Is there a name for a tiny fixation?
Yeah, probably microphilia.
Yeah, we'll have to find out what that is, Julia.
Yes, that's probably it. My new alter ego.
But I mean, I guess you don't really play with big to small, like mostly it's the opposite, right? Like, it's small. Sorry, I interrupted there.
No, that's, it's interesting to hear how other people see it, but.
Salad is made.
I'm trying to think.
Just a reminder to mute, because we're getting some feedback from you all.
I think what I'm most interested in playing with is the way that I imagine these things just sort of floating in space. And the way that really does kind of change the scale of it. Like, they could be anywhere, it could be any size.
Right.
So I think that is the most interesting part of the process, scale-wise for me. And I think once you get away from representing something at its actual size, like some of the earlier ones that we were looking at, like it looks like an island with trees growing on it, even though it's actually just this tiny little scrap of moss and dirt with a little tiny branch or flower. And I find that really interesting, and I think that playing with scale that way is maybe asking people to look at things a little bit differently. Maybe consider that something really tiny can also be really important without us noticing it. So I think I'd say those are my approaches to scale with these.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Should we scoot along?
Let's scoot along.
To the next.
This one also features some dead
things.
And presumably a bird skull?
Yeah, I think it's a mallard.
Okay.
I have a feeling because there's no comment.
Sorry, there were words that. Are there any topographic, micro-topographic features or specific types of spots that you are able to best spot these types of things in? And what are you hoping the viewer will get from this play with scale?
I just find these, when they start to look like a tiny world, I just find it really enchanting and kind of magical. You can sort of let all the analytical stuff fall away maybe and just sort of enjoy almost a sense of play, I think, like visual play.
Yeah, well, that's what I get, for sure.
Yeah, it's, as much as I am really interested in the ecology of things, they're also just kind of pleasurable landscapes to sort of lose yourself in, or maybe transport yourself to briefly to go somewhere else. But honestly, I find this stuff everywhere. There's, you know, if you send me downtown to put one of these together with stuff I found in the cracks on the sidewalks, I could do it for you.
Game on, you're coming to my yard.
Yeah.
I want a commission. I'm doing Christine's yard.
Roaming residency. Why not?
That's true. I didn't mean to start something. You can't all just contact her now to do that. But you know, but that is an interesting point because there is something you are looking at things in a completely unique way.
Yeah.
You know, and there's something to that.
It really
Giving
is
us
just
new eyeballs.
Here's
on
how
these
you
things.
just kind of crouch down.
But I appreciate that about it because, you know, it's kind of encouragement, I guess, for us, and maybe some of us have seen that a little bit more, you know, during the pandemic, but that you know, kind of being forced to slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, you're taking us there as well. Like, this is also saying, slow down.
Yeah. Whoa, guys.
Yeah,
Did you see this moss?
Yeah, see this moss. But it's so true. You know, I can't emphasize enough when I talk to people at the gallery about that, right? Because people are kind of transfixed by that. Like, they are going someplace else. That is magical. That is fun. It's a little escapist, but in the same way, like, not, because we also as adults and human beings know that these things exist in our world. We know you haven't made these out of clay. Like, they are, you know, they are real.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, let's keep going. Some of the mushrooms. Oh,
Yes.
and they're not in the show, but Julia, well, there's a couple pieces with mushrooms in the show. We saw one earlier. But Julia also has an entire series of spore prints. None of which are in the show, but certainly on your website. We have some at the gallery as well. You can look at our gallery website. So tell us a bit about your love of the mushroom. Because you do kind of have.
Yes, they're cool. There is a word for that.
I was just going to say.
And that is mycophilia.
Okay. Mycophilia. Okay.
They're really interesting. I mean, they're not plants. They're their very own kingdom for spore, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think I knew that, but you know, again, very interesting.
Yeah. So this is just a mushroom is like the apple on the tree. It's just this sort of fruit of this huge organism, which scientists are pretty much discovering just ties the entire universe together, basically.
Right.
So
How
that's already
trees
cool
talk.
enough. But if you leave them long enough, they start to drop their spores down. And so one of the ways that you can identify mushrooms is by doing a spore print, so you just see what color the spores are. I've been starting to do some now kind of in this direction where it actually looks like they're just sort of exhaling or creating these clouds.
It does.
And I've been doing some videos of them too, like these long time-lapse videos that sort of look like they're breathing in and out, which are really fun.
I know. Instagram.
Yes.
We'll give all that information at the end, because you should be following her. But it's true. It's hard to see the detail, probably, but it actually does look like there is
there's
like
some clouds.
There's some little clouds coming out of the mushroom spores.
Yeah.
And this one, I love these little, like, is this a pussy toe or something?
This one's called a Pixie Cup.
Pixie Cup, okay.
Yeah, so again, it doesn't get more magical than that. We did pass one back there that had a lichen called fairy puke.
Oh, right. Again, there's a good description about the fairy puke on her Instagram page, because how did you not bring up the fairy puke?
I know. How did we skip the
Thanks
fairy
for the top up. We need a little bit more. We're already a little over our time, but we'll just keep going. If you guys have to eat your dinner, then you eat your dinner. If not, just have another glass of wine with us. Okay, I'm very excited about this one. Okay, I'm gonna walk around the back. So this is one of your pieces from the Pacific Rim, correct?
Yeah.
So what is it? It's like a type of seagrass? Like, tell us a bit about, this one is like almost got like a very calligraphic kind of feel to it, right?
Yeah. And this is, when I go for walks on the beach, much like when I walk in the forest, stopping every 10 seconds, because I'm just obsessed with the way that these grasses get left behind by the ocean. Like I have probably 800 photos of just these sort of beautiful, elegant swirls of, I think it's called eelgrass, if I remember correctly, that are just washed up on the beach, and I find them so beautiful and so elegant, and I've always wanted to be able to reproduce it. So now being when I was there and I had this collections permit, was really great because I could collect this while it was still, had kind of just washed up, and then make a picture of it and then, take it back to the beach. And similarly with the shells, because even those just on their own are these like amazing tiny little islands that are an entire world.
Exactly.
Yeah, so they're just, I find them absolutely fascinating. The smaller you get and the closer you look at things, it just sort of opens this whole other universe. So.
Yeah. Well, no, and this one is like a beautiful line drawing with just these few little elements, but they're pretty fantastic. And again, like in case you didn't hear the part where Julia was talking about, like in this park, you just collect it and then immediately put back. So there is kind of that immediacy to it, right? But
absolutely.
But yeah, beautiful. This one caught my eye even as like a JPEG like that big. So very happy to see this one. Oh, there's a question. All right.
What is the biggest challenge you have in your art practice and the process of making art al fresco? And do you store the materials you use from your art pieces, or do you discard them after you have achieved this process? Sorry, you've answered that second one.
Yeah, I talked about that a little bit. Some of it I keep and some of it goes. Oh gosh, what's the biggest challenge? Sometimes it's weather. Sometimes it's being stuck at home when all the cool mushrooms are out.
Right.
It really is just kind of trying to make the most of where I am at a time and really focus. Getting, like, for example, if I'm fortunate enough to get funding to work on a project, that's the biggest gift to me, because it really means I can just kind of leave everything else behind and just really go to a place and just focus on that place for a lengthy period of time.
Well, and be able to travel to the Pacific Rim Park and grasslands, like these
and set up collections permits, like stuff like that is like, I'm a freelancer and an artist, so I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go to Tofino today. And they're like, okay, 3 weeks later I'll email you back about this inquiry to tell you who you actually need to direct it to. And then 6 weeks later, and the wheels of bureaucracy turn very slowly. So that's a challenge, but it's something that, the longer I do this, the more I learn about it.
Right.
And I go with it. So yeah.
See if I had
Any other burning questions?
Let's keep going. Well, and this is another beauty.
Another prairie.
I know, another prairie, another kind of fuller image.
Yeah.
So, I think this is a bit of a special image too, because this is obviously the one that the White also zoned into for their kind of marketing and promotion. So, talk to us a little bit about this, like the gathering of these materials.
This was another one. I did a residency earlier in the summer at a place called Kinship House, which is in Vulcan County sort of area. So it was, like I was saying earlier with the cacti, hot, windy, everything is just grass, but then as you sort of slow down and look at it, you start to see all these beautiful elements in the landscape.
Yeah, all the textures, right?
Yeah, and just the sort of subtle colors, and
again, it was the magic of the things.
And really, again, just being sort of in a position to slow down and observe really carefully, and find these things and learn about them and how they grow together, and some of them is sometimes a bit of a mystery because there's only the the seed, so it took me quite a while to actually recognize that plant because I normally see it when it's flowering, and this is actually flax, for example. So
Okay.
yeah, so a really interesting learning process, and just really digging into the landscape to get to know it.
Yeah, no, it's a beauty. All right.
I've got a question.
Oh, we have another question I'm going to say.
Do you think of your work as responding to the history of scientific specimens, botanical drawings?
Yeah, we'll keep moving. That's a good question, actually.
Yeah, and it's something that I think about a lot now, because I the more, of course, that I study science, the clearer it becomes that there's a certain kind of person who did all this exploration, 100 years ago, and there's a lot of societal values also, and assumptions that guided a lot of scientific research, and so that is something that I find really interesting, and something that I'm.
You're good. I'm just going to use data.
Okay. So, and one thing I did. I know. Oh, sorry. I guess I interrupted you. You were finishing a thought.
That's okay. We had a bit of a blip here. I think I'm definitely inspired by where science came from, and in learning about what assumptions were made and how things were explored and how things have been studied, and really trying to think about how that's affected my assumptions, and how I can really think about that when I'm looking at all these different landscapes, for sure. So.
Well, and there's always going to be like the 2.0 too, right? Like, of course, there's a rich history of that.
Yeah.
But as technology and techniques, and you're still in the same mindset as a lot. Like, in my opinion, you're still in the same mindset, because you're showing the appreciation and documentation. And of course, our landscapes are changing. So you're kind of capturing a precise period of time as well, right?
Absolutely.
Let's kind of scan over these three, because I have a question that's because these three are older pieces, and not like 10 years old, but a couple of years old. So one of the questions I had was just regarding how you feel that your creative practices maybe changed in the last, like from this body of work to say like the newer ones that we've seen.
Yeah, I think again it's just being a lot more deliberate about what I'm collecting, and now I think I have a clearer idea in mind of where the work will go, as opposed to just being like, that's interesting, that's neat, that might be cool.
Right.
So much more selective, much more deliberate, and just really.
Well, I really
focusing on representing a place.
Right. Well, and I do really love like.
I know, these
the
weird,
rocks.
yes.
It's like, I love the rocks.
This is what happens to some of the specimens that stay in my studio too long in their little glass jars.
I know, but there's something else so beautiful about it. Like, you're kind of like, oh, what is it? And you're like, oh, it looks like.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, but and that's what it is. I mean, it's rotting.
Because it's just some, it's other fungi and bacteria doing their work.
So are there many others? Because this is the only one I guess I've seen, or was this a little experimental?
Yeah, this was just just an experimental one. I try to avoid getting to the state with this.
You don't want to be cultivated.
I mean, I do, but not.
Yeah, I understand. But again, you kind of made something that it should be ugly. We see as ugly, something kind of beautiful as well.
It's still,
like these little pools. And again, on first glance, you just really don't know exactly what it is that it is wrought. Okay, so I know we only have just one little wall left, so we're gonna
let's
completely. And I'm so glad these are in a show. So Julia, I mean, I've been transfixed with these since I first saw them, and honestly, I think it's because they are so different from the other work. These are featuring your hand. The scale is life scale. Like, these are delicate, and I mean, still certainly that connection, but almost very personal too. Like, talk about that.
Yeah. Well, and I think when you say personal, that's part of it, because I think, and a few questions have come up like this, is sort of how do I square what I'm doing? I am, of course, very interested in conservation, but how do I sort of square that with collecting materials? So, in this case, this is, me trying to sort of resolve that, or at least make it a little bit clearer that I'm acknowledging that I'm like everybody else. I'm also implicated in what we're doing to the world, and so using my hand, the motif of the hand is, acknowledging that connection that I have with the place, and also my implication too, because I'm not, I drive a car, all these things. So,
Right.
Yeah, that's
well, in black and white. So, I mean, that's a deliberate choice too, because again, we have like the rich color. I mean, that little robin's egg blue that we have there, and the verdant greens and grays.
I do have some of these in color. But this is a relatively new body of work, so I'm still
playing with
still playing around with it. But I think the black and white probably, to me, I think just simplifies things a little bit and becomes more about the connection, as opposed to maybe you getting lost in like the colors of a feather. So it makes sense to me, and that's why I was curious too. Yeah, it makes sense to me. That being more personal, there is like a sense of I guess memory and nostalgia with it as well, right? Yeah. So I'm glad. Like I said, I was really happy to see these because I've seen them once at the gallery. You brought them in, and it's cool to see them all together.
But so I guess we went a little over time, but are there more? Like, I'm sure. Let's open it for questions. So please ask her all the tough questions. You guys have gone really easy on her.
I have a question. Says, like Schaefer and Vox, do you think being an artist, non-biologist, is an advantage to open it up?
I think it changes the way that I think about things, for sure. I know in my interactions, for example, sort of with people who are in charge of the collections at a natural history museum, I would be like, okay, I'm here, can you show me some of your like coolest eggs? And they're like, coolest? like cool colors or interesting shapes, and they're like, could you be more specific? So I think I look at things maybe primarily with an aesthetic eye first, which is just another way of looking at things. Like I don't think science necessarily has all the answers for us. Like I was saying a little bit earlier, that while I am inspired by it, I'm also interested in, maybe that's not always the right way to look at how things are connected or to look at living things. I think it just gives me a bit of a different perspective. I can use part of it, and it can inform my work and my practice and studies, but I can also step away from it and look at things with maybe a more tender gaze than analytical.
Yeah, 100%.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I really like that artistic approach. On the flip side, are there any things that you would be incredibly excited to capture that you have not had the opportunity to?
Like the rest of the world.
like that moss right over there. I think I'm really interested, and this is not something that I would be doing out in the world, but rather with a museum collection, but something with extinct species. Because I have been in some collections and been able to see like a passenger pigeon, for example, which is just like kind of a mind-blowing experience. And some of these places have these cabinets full of things that just don't exist anymore.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting. I don't know. I find every kind of moss fascinating, so I don't discriminate.
It's true.
I'm just as excited about the next patch of moss.
But I mean, you've also captured some pretty photogenic mosses. Let's be honest.
That's what I mean, though. Like, they're all photogenic.
But I know this question has come up before too, and maybe just as an extension to that, there have been questions about where where your travels will kind of take you next. Like, are you kind of planning to go across like Canada? I mean, I guess maybe, obviously there's travel restrictions right now.
Yeah, once things loosen up, that's definitely on the horizon. I've been mostly sticking with Western Canada just because it's because I'm traveling in my vehicle with my little science machine. But I'm definitely traveling across Canada. There's so much more to see. So yeah, that's definitely.
Should we do the last question?
Yeah, last one.
Last question.
The last question is, what is your biggest challenge in your art practice?
Oh, well, yeah, so we were chatting about that a little bit. Getting rained out is a challenge.
Yeah, I guess you just don't get a sense of rain at all.
Yeah.
So. But you also have the alfresco science machine. This is a slight tangent, but you do have, and it has its own Instagram page, which we will also give you. But
Link in the bio.
I mean, yeah, exactly, link in the bio. Yeah. But I mean, it's
so
awesome. You can kind of cruise around with your like, teardrop trailer and
just kind of set up wherever. So, so that definitely overcomes some challenges, but also creates its own challenges, which is working out of a tiny, tiny camper.
Right.
Which can get dusty, and
of course,
sometimes there's no electricity. But anyway, so I think part of it is just access to places. It's sometimes a very slow process, but necessary. And I mean, honestly, there's so much amazing stuff in the world that I don't have any challenge finding material, I don't think. It's really just a question of getting access and having the time really to dig in and work on things. So,
I guess we'll wrap it up. I know we went probably a little over time for everyone. I hope it was an informative talk. We just kind of get going, and obviously there's a lot to discuss. So certainly, one thing I did want to mention too, Julia is creating a small limited edition print.
just for this show,
which will be available through the museum shop. Exactly.
You will be shocked to hear it's moss.
Yeah. Surprise! But the most beautiful twee moss you've ever seen.
Piece of moss.
But it's also a great opportunity for the show because her work is, as you see, is quite large, to collect something that is a little bit smaller. These works are also, obviously, please come see the show because you're getting kind of digital images. It's not doing them justice. There's a beauty that you just can't get through this media. So I encourage you to come down to the White and see this beautiful exhibition. And if you are interested in purchasing one of these gorgeous prints, you can contact myself, Christine, at the Christine Klassen Gallery. All the work is edition, so it is available for sale. And I guess that's all I have to say. Is there anything? Thank you so much
to
the White for hosting us. To Donna and Anne and Sarah, we're all. Thank you so much for having us. We had a blast.
The perfect home for my work.
Ding.